Are your golden handcuffs a benefit or a source of stress? And for those of you who do not know what they are, the definition of golden handcuffs, according to the Corporate Finance Institute, is financial documents and benefits given to certain employees to encourage them to remain with the organization for a longer period of time. Hi, welcome to Rekindle XM, where we talk about stress, burnout, and effective ways to recover from the ashes of burnout and rekindle our fire. I'm your host, Brian, and with me today are Michelle and Masha. Before we jump into the topic, we have some more information on our book. We've been working through the author questionnaire, and for those who have never had to do an author questionnaire, it is quite the journey. But this is a tool that the publishers use to help promote our book as we get closer to publishing. And the unlucky person who's got to do most of this is Michelle, so I'll let her give a little more on how fun it was. Michelle?
Well, I do enjoy research, so in some ways it has been fun. But I would say that for those of who have never gone through this process of trying to write and publish a book, there is so much more to it than any of the three of us thought. But we've had some fun with this. We've actually done field trips to our local bookstores, looking for book covers that we like and getting some ideas. We've also had to go to several websites to figure out the right numbers of, what do I call this book? Where does it fit in the category? So it has been a lot of research. We also get to answer some fun questions like, what were the challenges you encountered when you were writing this book? And then on the flip side, what is your favorite part of the book? So it's actually been a learning process, as all of this is, but super excited. We'll be getting this done very shortly, and then we'll be on to the next steps.
All right, back to golden handcuffs. So when we think about golden handcuffs, do we generally think they are good or bad? So first we'll talk about how golden handcuffs benefit both the employee and the employer. So my first example today is Michelle. She actually worked for the medical company that she worked at for 20 plus years. She had excellent benefits and everything else. Michelle, how did you feel about the golden handcuffs and how did they benefit you?
Well, I didn't hear that term golden handcuffs until I'd actually been there for probably at least 10 to 15 years. So when I first heard it, I was like, that's an interesting term. It was my manager, and she was actually talking about it in more of a negative light with her manager, because she's like, yeah, she's just tied to the company because of the golden handcuffs. And, as I started thinking about it, I'm like, well, I guess I have those golden handcuffs also, but they're working pretty well for me right now. So I worked in over 6 different departments, and radically different departments. I kind of moved up through the organization from, that entry level job all the way through senior management. I did have great benefits. Like, Brian, you would always tease me because I had, oh goodness, like 5.5 weeks of vacation every year. I mean, I couldn't even use it. So I had great vacation. We did actually have a retirement plan, both the tax deferred type, where they would put money into it and they would match a certain amount of your salary every month, and then I could contribute. But they actually had a pension plan as well, which is almost unheard of these days. So the retirement was great. We got almost free health benefits for both you and I. For a long time, it was really beneficial. To me as the employee. I worked with great people. It was a good company for a very long time. It worked well. And, from the company's perspective, it's so expensive to hire someone new. So they put out statistics on this, and there is actually one from the Strategic HR Management Group. And they say that every time you replace an employee, it's a cost that equals about 6 to 9 months of that employee's pay. So it's also a benefit for companies to keep employees for, as long as it's beneficial to both parties, because it is so hard and there's so much disruption when you have constant turnover. So I can see that there are definitely some great aspects to that. Some companies even give a hiring bonus if you stay for a year. You're going to get this lump sum of money. So there's some definite positives. I mean, I didn't feel like I was chained in at all. The one thing I would say, at least in my personal experience, is I had a great mentor. And that was actually Dan Miller, who's the author of 48 Days to Work You Love. And one of the things he said is make sure you stay in the driver's seat in your career. So if you're going to go into a situation and you have those golden handcuffs, just make sure that you're paying attention and staying in the driver's seat. But if you are doing that, it can be a real benefit.
Yeah, and from the employer side, I think the amount of effort they have to do to train somebody new into how they do things, even if the person has years of experience in that, they still have to learn how the company wants to do it. And that takes time. That takes at least a week to a month or more. And
Mhm.
for like new employees who have just out of school, they have to learn. I mean, the school only teaches the rough basics of things. So anytime you go into a working situation as a just out of school person, you have such a learning curve that the company has to put so much money into you that they definitely want to
Mhm.
encourage those golden handcuffs. Masha, what are your thoughts?
Well, the first time I heard golden handcuffs, I was like, huh? It's been, I've been in the business world, and my former husband brought that up, the golden handcuffs, and he was talking about it. I can't say I understood what it really meant. When you hear the word golden handcuffs, like it's gold, yet it's handcuffs. And it's like for those of us who love shiny things, it doesn't matter what they are, they're shiny, right? And you kind of apply this to the job. Well, it pays, it provides, it has great benefits. I can see how it can be beneficial for me to stay here longer, even if it's uncomfortable. But also on the side of from employees, I don't want to change jobs like disposable gloves and learn something new and just be
Mhm.
wind in the freeway, just do new things until, I land somewhere. I've always been loyal to the organization that I've been with, and I kind of plant myself there and I become part of the culture because you find the purpose there, but it's not your purpose, it's their purpose, and you help them grow. So I think it's a recipe, right? It's good when it serves both parties. It becomes a burden when it starts to be difficult to do your daily tasks.
Okay, that leads us to our next definition. I'm dissatisfied with my job. In fact, I'm burned out. But the money is so good, and I finally got the reasonable amount of paid time off with great healthcare coverage. Don't even get me started on how great the 401k match is, with only being 1 year from full employer contribution. I couldn't possibly switch my careers without losing everything I have already worked for and start over at the bottom to slowly work my way up again. So, Masha, you kind of led into this a little bit. How does this connect with you? Is this how you felt? This is how I felt in my engineering career. But go ahead.
You're right. It is really a mindset. And when we go back to our cultural conditioning episodes, we talk about how culture contributes to what we become and how we're expected to perform in the corporate environment. You pick a place, you stay there until retirement, then you retire and have a good life, right? That's the obsolete definition of a career per se.
Yep.
So, yes, within the golden handcuffs tend to get, like in my experience, I've gotten too comfortable and I overstayed my welcome. It no longer served me and my employer, yet I stayed there a little longer because my mindset wasn't what was going to be. When you are in burnout, it's a mindset issue on one side of it, right? And when you're in burnout, you don't have confidence, you don't have the self-worth, you don't have what it takes to make the push, make the leap until it gets too uncomfortable. It's like the story of a boiling frog. So I'll let you comment on that because I can go on a little bit more.
Yeah, I understand what you're going through there. And in my story, I started out as a computer-aided drafter before I went back and finished my civil engineering degree. And I wasn't actually looking at civil engineering at the time that I first started going back to school. I was actually looking at getting out of engineering completely. But I started looking at what I wanted to do and how I'd have to start all over. And it would take me the same amount of hours and credits and money to do that versus going back and just finishing the engineering degree that I already started. I couldn't convince myself that that was the better way to go. So I went back into the engineering degree, and that's when the golden handcuffs really started to change color
Mhm.
on me. They weren't really golden anymore. They were starting to become rusted and kind of dangerous to keep on. Um,
Yeah. Well, I think you
Shell,
both.
how prevalent do you think this is in the view? How prevalent do you think this view is in the workforce today? And you
Okay, I'm going to
can
go
go
back
ahead and
first.
respond.
So, yeah.
Okay.
I think you both brought out a good point, which is there are definitely pros and cons. And I think where a lot of times we go wrong, and maybe even companies do this as well, is we stay too long where we're not evaluating the pros and cons. I really feel like there should be, as part of every year, as we kind of look at the year coming ahead of us, regardless of when you do it, you should reevaluate your working life. Is it still working for you? Are you still in the right job? Do those golden handcuffs, are they still serving you? There's pros and cons. So at some point, you have to be able to evaluate where the cons overcome the pros, or vice versa, if you're going to stay there. So I think you guys bring up a good point, which is most of us skip that because we get so entrenched, we just don't want to look at making a change. All right. So, but going back to your question, Brian, about the statistics, the definition of golden handcuffs is changing. Every year, the or the Bureau of Labor puts out statistics, and if you look at the median time that people are staying in positions since 2012, so that's 12 years of data, the median time, which is the most common amount of time, so it's not an average, but it's the most common amount of time that people are staying in their jobs, it is going down every single year for both men and women in every industry across the board. So the definition is changing. And of course, the older people, so if you're 60 to 65, that age range, it's more likely that you've stayed longer. If you're in your 20s, it's more likely that you haven't stayed as long. But that shift over time says that this concept of golden handcuffs is probably changing, and that as a workforce, as for the United States, as a workforce, we are not staying as long, and perhaps not as tied to the golden handcuffs. So we'll see if that trend continues, and
Do you
if
think
employers,
I'm going to interject here. Do
yeah.
you think it's more that the golden handcuffs aren't working or that people are starting to realize that quicker that the career that they started doesn't fit them? I mean, when we think about boomers and late Xers and even you and I, Michelle, um,
Mhm.
we had the mindset that you pick one career and you stick with it to the end. I
I
don't
think we
think that
did have that mindset. I actually think that's
yes,
changing in our generation because, I think the boomers are still the most likely, obviously, to stay for 10 years. In fact, that is their median, is that they're at a place for 10 years. But it's going down dramatically as each 10 years you go down, the amount of time is changing. So I think that Xers are changing. We're changing our minds because we're seeing what the younger folks are doing. And we're like, oh, well, maybe I don't have to stay. And maybe it's not even financially a good thing for me to stay. So it's obviously shifting, but we don't know why.
There is one thing that actually came to my mind when you were talking about this, and perhaps it is an issue of a different level of golden handcuffs. They shifted to somewhere else. For example, in millennials, the expectation is You go and you get education, 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 education. After high school, you go to college, you get bachelor's. After that, you go and you get your master's. After that, you go and you get PhD, and then you're ready for the workforce. And during this time, you have no career experience and you're unemployed in a meaningful job. You do these temp things. I've seen that with a few of our millennials that are around in my family and around our family, and there is no motivation to land a job and keep it. There's a motivation to keep studying, and they want remote jobs. They want jobs that are not 40 hours, that pay 40 hours, but they are 20 hours. And that's the expectation. And when I'm in those conversations, I'm like, whoa, where did you get that idea? Because that's not what
Well, that's
I've been
somewhat
exposed to.
true, but the Xers, I mean, when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, it was acceptable to be at a job for 2 years before you leave. If you were at a job for 2 years and you left and you tried to get another job to get paid a little better or whatever, it was not looked down upon. If you were less than 2 years, and especially less than a year, then they start wondering, well, why are you leaving the job so much? And I think that's been a declining amount of time as we move to younger generations. So, yes, millennials were there, but we were kind of already headed in that direction. What are some other
And you
thoughts?
can see of the house. uh, I agree. When you think about the households of our millennials, they see Generation Xers and boomers, parents and grandparents. They're enslaved to their careers. They may be absent parents. They may show up when they can, and it's not enough to meet the needs of the family and of their kids. And they want different lives for themselves. So they attach themselves to something else, a different kind of life. So yeah, interesting trend. I expect it to continue.
I mean, it probably will continue. I do find it interesting that um, when you think about the Gen Z who's entering and the especially younger millennials, you're also trying to figure out where your zone of genius is, and you often don't know it. I mean, some people do, and if you do, if you're in your 20s, early 30s, and you know your zone of genius, like these are the people that just skyrocket, professionally, but most of us don't. So it also makes sense that you're going to have shorter career spans at an employer because you're still trying to figure it out. But then as you get older, so one, you know what you're good at, so you're looking for jobs that fit. But then two, you're starting to look at retirement and you're wanting a certain level of retirement. And I think that's where that trade off with the golden handcuffs becomes a very real tension point because I've known people who they're like, no, like at the company that I worked, there were many who were there their entire career. And when they hit about, 50, they're like, oh, okay, I only have 15 more years here. I just have to stick it out. And then I get this great, severance. I get great healthcare. I get all these great benefits. So it was sort of like, if you're 50 and you're still there, you're staying. So I also think
That's
there's
the
differences
problem
in
is
times of life.
the longest I ever stayed at a job was 7 years, and that was counting internships. I
Right.
can't imagine staying someplace 15 years. Although hopefully Rekindle gets that way. But anyway,
And there's a different mindset between business ownership and corporate employership. In my former business, I stayed up to 12 years, and I would have stayed longer if it wasn't for the situation I was in. So now in healthcare, I've been there for, quite some time. And my mindset is just that you pick something and you stick it out and you grow within there until you can grow no more. And then if it's the wrong job or the wrong field, then you look at something else. So yes, with Rekindle, it's purpose and it's passion and it's reaching the hearts and it's enlightening recognition and awareness to people's situations and helping them realize are they in the right place at the right time or not. So once you find your purpose and your passion, it becomes cake.
yes. I mean,
Well,
I
but
to go
okay,
ahead,
but
Michelle.
I have one more thought. So if you are okay, you're close to being able to retire from a company. Let's say you have 1 or 2 years and you can retire. and you're like, okay, all I got to do is stick it out for 2 more years and then I can go pursue whatever passion I want. So that's a different situation than if you have 10 to 15 years to go and you're like, oh, I am not waiting 10 to 15 years. And that's actually the situation where I found myself was I'm ready to pursue something different. I am not willing to stick it out another 15 years. There's just, so I think that comes into play as well as how much time do you have left?
Yeah, but you didn't even stick it out to 2 years to get your full pension. So I don't think you
That's
can
true.
count
That's true.
yourself
But
among that.
I also ran the numbers and financially it just there wasn't a big difference. So it was like, and that's one thing I would say is that when you're making that decision and looking at that decision, you do have to run all your numbers. What is the benefit of staying versus the benefit of leaving? What is your earning potential somewhere else? And where is your passion versus, um, you know, the time you would need to wait. So you have to weigh all of those things. There's not necessarily a right or wrong in every situation, unless you're burned out, in which case you need to change.
And there's the risk. As we've seen in 2018 ProPublica statistics, they did a study the Urban Institute did a study that 50% of American workers that were nearing retirement age in those particular jobs were losing them. And more
Yep.
than 50% of those 50% lost it more than once, up to 3 times. So at that
Yes.
point, the golden handcuffs no longer serves the employer, and the employer may not be in a position to sustain those benefits. And that's the risk we have to take into account if we decide to marry our job with golden handcuffs until retirement.
Yes. And Masha, you bring up a really good point, which is sometimes those golden handcuffs are a one-way street. Sometimes the employer is going to change, and what you thought you were going to get by staying in that situation isn't what you actually end up with, or you just may not have that option. So I think regardless, you have to rely on your skills and you have to be thinking of a backup plan. You have to be evaluating constantly. I guess you can't just ever kind of go to sleep and just expect that, oh, I'm just going to work here until I retire.
Okay. But the people that do that are happy with what they're doing and happy
Mm-hmm.
with the benefits that they are getting, even though they run the risk of occasionally having somebody come in and buy them out or whatever, or the company goes bankrupt. So
Yep.
I want to focus more on the people that are miserable. Their handcuffs are not golden. They kind of lean towards rusty or an iron cage to where you feel like you're trapped. And as Masha started talking about, when we first started talking about the golden handcuffs changing colors, is kind of a mindset, and that can be a difficult thing to start moving towards, is changing that mindset that you don't have to stay in that job or that career. So there's an article in Forbes article in Forbes. I'll get there someday. From November of 2020 called Free Yourself from the Golden Handcuffs for a More Purposeful Career. And the article gives 5 steps to work through to help you find that more purposeful career. And the first step is imagine a new future for yourself. So Michelle and I had reached a point in our lives and career that we needed to reimagine what our lives would be like. And we've kind of talked about this off and on during the different podcasts, but we had reached it. This actually, the funny thing is it started right before COVID became official. We didn't even really know about COVID when we were doing this. So we were wanting to step away from our lives at that point. And we were trying to envision what our lives would be like if we stepped away from what we were doing. We went up to the mountains. We did a week retreat where we kind of continued to work, but we would take time off to imagine and dream about where we could go and what we wanted to do, because the handcuffs were an iron cage and the lifestyle was an iron cage. We just really wanted out of it. And that took 2 years for us to imagine and find a solution. Michelle, did what we envision end up the same as today?
No, and I think that is one of the scary parts about stepping away from the golden handcuffs, because we tend to be more comfortable even if we don't enjoy it, even if we're in a wrong situation. We still have a really hard time when we step away because there is that element of the unknown, and rarely does that next step work out exactly like you think it's going to, because we didn't know at that time exactly what we wanted to do. We didn't really know what the vision was. I will say that there have been some parts of it that have been amazing, but it never ends up exactly like you think. So you have to be willing to take that first big leap and leave, and that's, or make the decision to leave. And I think that's always hard.
Yes, make the decision to leave. Masha, what are your thoughts?
What I like about the article, that it talks about not tearing them off, but slipping them
Mm.
off sl slightly and easily. And I think
But
there's a
we're
lot of
talking
wisdom
about
to that.
imagine a new future for yourself. Come on.
Imagine a new future, leap into that mental state. Fine, I'm already ahead of you. I think it starts with envisioning your future, you're right, but then having the faith to start manifesting it in your mind of what do you want it to look like. And of course, it's got to be an element of realism there. Like I would love to sell my house and get an RV and follow you guys around the country. I mean, that would be amazing. The reality of it is I'm tied down, I'm anchored in by other things, my child and my grandmother. So until that um, future manifests into what it is. My kid goes to college and I don't know, tow my grandma behind me in an RV. That could be a possibility, but probably not. It has to be a dose of what is possible for me in near future versus the long-term future. I do want to travel and I do not want to be bound to one place. That is something that I've imagined and I lived it a little and I love it. I don't want to be in Colorado year round. I want to be here during the summers. During the winters, I want to be somewhere warm, somewhere with an ocean. And I want my job to be able to accommodate that. So if you work in the virtual world, it is a reality, right? But if you're bound to that career and you are on a 10-year track to finish off that last 5, 10 years, whatever that is, all you're bound to is vacation. And reimagining things first does make sense because then your heart starts growing into it. And that change, when it presents itself, when the opportunity presents itself, you'll be in the right mindset to be able to transition into it. So, yes, lots of dreams and goals and hopes for the future. And mainly, what I want to do is not just live a purposeless life. I want to contribute to society and serve my community. And that is where my passion and my dreams are.
Okay. It's interesting. I think you either have that wanderlust or you don't. It always surprises me that people are happy staying their whole lives in one place because I have that wanderlust and I just can't imagine it. Um, the longest I've ever stayed in one house is what, eight, 9
8 years.
years, Michelle?
Hmm.
8 years? Yeah.
And you were ready to
I
move
mean,
after like the first 3.
in that first house, yes, yes. It took me 5 more years to convince her that that house wasn't for us. That was a great house to start with, but I've just always been wanting to go do something else, I guess. Not so
Mhm.
much as far as work, just travel and
Well,
see. So, all right, go ahead.
but I'm just gonna, so Masha and Brian, like, you both bring out a really good point though, which is, you can envision and you can have these grand ideas of the future, but as Masha said, you also have to have a dose of realism and understanding either, A, it's going to take time, which is usually true regardless. B, you may not, you have to envision a future that actually makes sense for you, which kind of goes back to your purpose and what you want. Um, so you can imagine, but then it's not always it's not always going to work out exactly like you imagine it.
And be
Yes.
careful, married couples, you have to dream together. There is
Yep.
a other side of the coin, and somebody that we know in our community, married 50 years. He's been in the same job, burned out, hated life, loved his wife, loved his children. Children are grown, and he had this picture of Caribbean and one of those um, boats with that he I'm not a boatneer, so I can't tell you what the boat is. But anyway, it had multiple chambers, and his dream was to move to the Caribbean and to be a tour guide overnight in the seas, take people deep sea fishing. That was his dream. It wasn't his reality. His wife wasn't on board. And what happened one day, he saved some money and he quit his job, left his family, moved to Caribbean on his own, and started his dream life alone. And we're all in the community just like shocked. He never talked about it. It just happened overnight. He's still in love with his wife, but he could no longer tolerate the life that he was in.
Wow. Yes, that's a really good point. When and it's often true that you have someone you have to talk to. Masha, you have your daughter, because you can't just go, like you said, you can't abandon her. She's not old enough yet. Can't abandon grandma. Brian and I had to talk through, and that's part of the reason it took a little while, but it's actually been a great experience as you talk through with your loved ones, because you start to realize, oh wow, I never really knew this about you. So it makes me wonder if that husband and wife ever had any of those discussions. I think it's been enlightening as Brian and I have learned about each other. I'm sure you've had that experience with your daughter too, as you've been talking about that.
Yeah, I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves though, because it kind of fits into other parts of the steps. So
Okay.
the next step is don't break the handcuffs, slowly slip them off. It needs to be an intentional plan. And you have to have it in place. So going back to what I was saying when Michelle and I first decided that we had to get out of the life that we were in, we made a plan on how to do that. We knew we had to sell our house, and we knew we had to have a certain amount of um, leftover from that sell to be able to make those changes. And if we couldn't get that, then there was no point in selling the house, and we would have had to figure out something else. That took 2 years to get the house ready to sell and start to figure out how we could slip those handcuffs off. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Masha, you kind of started talking about that a little bit.
I want to go back really quick to step one, and something that is a common practice is making a vision board of your future and what you want it to look like. When this exercise was first brought to me, I was like, I'm not doing this stupid thing. Like, what is this? Right? I really looked down on it. My mindset was like not there at all. And to me, looking at magazines and cutting out papers was like second grade activity. I was not willing to participate. But in that time, looking back, I was limited and not dreaming about where I wanted my life to be. And when I did erupt out of that mindset, the first thing I did was a vision board. So interestingly enough, to have something that your goal and your mindset is aligning to next things is the actions. And of course, you can tear off the handcuffs. You gotta wiggle them off and slip them off, but they also gotta be loose enough, and they gotta be skin's gotta be slippery enough for them to be able to slip off. So being able to have a goal, 5-year plan, 1-year plan, whatever it is, but then you break it down into actionable steps. Okay, well, what do I need? I have a mortgage. Well, are you going to keep this mortgage, or are you going to downsize, sell the house, and use that money towards something else, right? Like a strategy. So it is a negotiation with yourself and with your family. Here's the dream, what stays and what goes. And we as human beings like to collect things, and we don't like to let things go, right? And this is the biggest burden of trying to simplify. I look around and I was like, huh, the only way to simplify is to tear this whole thing down and like go with a suitcase and bam. But you were talking about staying in one place for no longer than 8 years, and it was difficult for you, Brian, moving homes. I stayed at my condo, my townhome that we owned where my daughter was born for 16 years. And it was also a mindset issue. I did not see myself moving. And that was childhood trauma that I had to overcome because as an 11-year-old, I came home one day and my mom was packing up my suitcase. And I thought we were going on vacation. But on the way to the airport, I was told we are moving to a different continent. And that trauma was like, I didn't say goodbye to anybody I loved, and I didn't pack my favorite things. And I had a lot of them as an 11-year-old. So with this mindset, I was a tree. When I was planted at my condo, I gave roots, and you do not move a tree was my mindset. I'm going to stay there until God knows what. So overcoming that mindset and letting go was the first thing I had to work through. And likewise, when you are letting go and slipping off your golden handcuffs, we got to see what is holding us back if they are no longer serving me. And it could be emotional childhood trauma that you have to work through to be able to grow into the future that you want. That is what I had to do.
Yeah, and to take it back to talking about, slipping them off. So, Masha, it's interesting because you started slipping them off when you did make that decision to let go of the condo and move, and you even talked about that. So that was like the beginning of your mind shift, and changing those thought patterns. Brian and I, it did take 2 years, and we did start changing our mindset, and our mindset change was, okay, we've definitely made the decision that we're leaving our current lifestyle. But then we were intentional over those next 2 years. The one thing though that we didn't plan, and this is something to consider, because even if you have a great plan, it won't always fall into place. So we had two things. One was COVID, which slowed us down. But two was our house sold so quickly, and we did not have a good plan to get rid of all of our stuff. So that was the one thing we really didn't plan for. We thought it would take a lot longer to sell our house, but I will say that having that overall plan, even though the timeline didn't quite go as we had planned to, we were hoping for 1 year, it took 2. It did eventually get us to where we wanted to be. So yes, you absolutely have to have a plan and go slowly. Don't just walk in, cuss your boss out and leave. That doesn't work very well.
I did live through that too. Not
Okay,
personally.
before
I
we
did
get
not do
into
that.
that,
Don't do it. And if
Don't do
somebody in
it.
your family did that, send them back begging back for their job.
or finding another one. Anyway, so the next step is to research and evaluate your options. This was one of the hardest steps for me because in my burnout, I couldn't think outside of anything else than engineering as far as my skill sets and talents could be used for. And I still kind of struggle with that today. Um, it's really hard to think outside of what you know, especially when you've been doing it for 20 years or more, because you're kind of ingrained in that, and it kind of correlates with Masha's not wanting to sell her house. You got to change that mindset, saying, I have problem solving skills, I have talents in these other things, I have good math skills, I can get out of engineering. I just need to find that right step. And I had to start thinking out of the box. And strangely enough, we're not even doing anything close to math or engineering. Um, Writing this book was one of the biggest shocks in my life. I mean, I never wanted to do anything with writing. It was one of my worst subjects. I hated it as far as grammar and stuff goes. So this was definitely a leap out of what I knew. Um, how has this worked for you guys?
I can totally relate because English is not my first language and grammar, what is that exactly? Can you like define what it is? Can somebody like do it for me, right? So I missed a big chunk of things that I speak how I write, and I was supposed to have 2 years of English classes in my former continent, but I ditched all them because I had no value in knowing English to who I was. I was never going to use a language and it had no benefit for me. So learning it in middle school was enlightening. And I've written poems before, but I never thought I would be an author. I had the passion, I had the seed, I wanted to, and I did write, and I wrote so much, but I never had the courage to share it because it was personal and there were great stories, but that grammar piece is like I was afraid to be mocked and shamed because I had no confidence or self-worth to embrace that my message had meaning and could serve many people. And I think once we plant our roots somewhere in some field that we think we're destined to be, and we decide, nope, this is actually not the path I want to go on, and there's another talent and passion that you want to embrace, I think the first step that I had to overcome was finding my self-worth and determining I am worthy to be what I want to be and become who I'm destined to become. And who am I to limit that if it isn't God's plan? And having that faith and making this project complete was really a dream come true. And I never thought in my life that we would partner up and write this amazing book that we're so excited to share with the world.
It's interesting because all three of us were part of an entrepreneur network, and we still stay in touch with a lot of different entrepreneurs. And most people do limit themselves to a very narrow lane based on what they've been doing, and they don't see all of the other skills and talents and abilities that they have. So, Masha and Brian, I'm with you. I never thought I would be writing a book. But there are so many skills, so many abilities that we shortchange ourselves on once we get into a very narrow lane and we kind of get those golden handcuffs. We actually have to change that mindset. Even after leaving, for Brian and I, we left, we took a year sabbatical. It still took that entire year to shift that mindset. And particularly for Brian, you can speak to this, to start looking, going, oh, I have a lot of other talents and abilities and skills that are not in engineering. So I think that is a struggle for everyone, is to really research and evaluate those options, because we tend to limit ourselves so much when we have a lot more available options.
Yes. Okay, the next step is to develop a timeline you can stick to. Well, I think we hashed that one out pretty good already. I don't know
That
how
is
much we
the
need to beat that dead.
only key to success about this timeline. If you're doing something you've never done before, the secret recipe is you have to have an engineer on your team, period. End of story.
Or
Yes.
somebody who's good at administrative and keeping people in line, I guess. So the final step
Wrote
is
a
to
book in
embrace the
5
thrill
months.
Thanks to Brian.
of change while relying on a support network. So it talks about finding like-minded individuals to walk with during this change, and that is very important. When Michelle and I first started talking about leaving Colorado and finding a new place to live, I mean, our family was somewhat accepting of it, but I don't think we've ever got the full buy-off on it. So we had ourselves to rely on. So we had a support group for ourselves to work through it, and we knew we needed to make the change. When the three of us started working through our burnout recovery journey, that was our support group, and started writing the book, and that caused even more, not necessarily misunderstanding between family and friends, but it's hard for them to realize some of the steps you have to go through to get out of burnout, and especially then to try to make a career out of it. But you definitely need to find at least one person who you can talk to and have them walk alongside you and help raise you up when you start to feel depressed, or am I doing this? Should I be doing this? Otherwise, you won't be able to stick to it. What are your guys' thoughts?
Of course, I can comment on that. One of the things I do agree with you on is, in my personal experience, family was not a good support system for me. My daughter was. She was amazing. She knew what I was doing and she cheered me all the way. Everybody else, I threw in a fishing rod and dropped some clues, and what I've gotten was belittling and completely writing off what my intentions were and what I was going through. And I realized, okay, it's not going to be my family who's going to be my support system. It's going to be somebody outside of that. And of course, we came together and we're a support system. And then other people that when I started sharing my message, I got so much support and so much love, and that just fueled my fire. One of my closest friends in Texas, she was talking about when you're doing something new, you need Power Rangers. I'm like, what are you talking about? And she explained the concept of Power Rangers is that is your cheerleading team. That is your go-to people. When you're feeling down, you pick up the phone and you unload and you get a dose of joy and cheer and you keep going. I'm like, oh, can you be my Power Ranger? And of course, she's my Power Ranger, right? And it was incredible experience that sense of community, that help, that love that comes in just because I had the courage to open up and share what I'm doing. The support was endless. The love and the energy I've gotten from them was irreplaceable, and I could have not found it anywhere else.
Yeah, I agree. So back in, oh goodness, over a year and a half ago, I joined an entrepreneur network, the 48 Day Eagles, and an amazing community of like-minded individuals, many of them coming out of the corporate world, and we were all coming from different experiences, but there was a commonality because we were all pursuing our purpose and our passion. And that made such a difference, because when you don't get that support from perhaps former friends, colleagues, family, whatever it is, who don't understand why you're switching, especially if it appears that you're successful, having a new support group that does understand is invaluable. And there are groups like that everywhere. Like, even if you are out in the middle of the rural area where there's perhaps not a lot of support, there is support somewhere online, so it is available. You just have to find it.
Becoming part of the community, not just to take, but to give. And
Mhm.
it becomes so natural to have that exchange of genius. And you benefit not just from receiving, but from giving and gifting. And that's an incredible feeling to contribute to somebody else's success just because you've been through something and you share your story with them and they're going through the same thing. It is invaluable, like you said. And it inspires me every single day, is that someone's going through something we have gone through, and we can just give them drops of hope and steps how we've gotten there. And it is possible. You can totally get where you want to be and have the life that you dreamed of having. You have to start dreaming first. And then, like Brian took us through the steps, make it actionable. You're not
Yes.
alone.
So, in kind of closing up, the concept of golden handcuffs by itself is not bad. It can be a happy union between the employee and the employer. But if that's not how you feel, start examining the different ways you can transition to a purposeful work. If you haven't done so yet, please hit the like button, ring the bell, and subscribe for future podcasts. We'll see you next week.